My name is Rafi. I actually started Storied Life about a year ago. It came actually from a personal experience with my parents. They're both 87 and survivors. And they both had an interesting life. And they always tell me, why don't you sit down with me and write my life story? And I was like, maybe I have a few talents, but writing is not one of them. But as an engineer and a business person, I was like, well, there's got to be a way to solve this problem somehow. And timing was perfect because that's when AI and ChatGPT was kind of hitting the market, and speech technology was also getting much better in understanding people and also speaking in a more natural way. And I was like, well, why can't we all have like a personal biographer and ghostwriter that kind of really cares and is interested in us and what we have to say? And that's where I started Storied Life. I put a team together, and we've been working on it for almost a year. And now we're actually able to launch it. And if you're interested, you can come by. I'll tell you more about it, and I can hook you up with it. Why would I even do this? My parents needed something, but I always found it fascinating that we kind of live life moment to moment, like right now, but we make sense of it as a story. So whenever something interesting happens in our life, we have a tendency to kind of want to grab onto it. So we take a picture or a video clip or something. But whenever we look back at it, it never makes any sense. Like it really means nothing. It's just a bunch of people around a table. So the interesting part, which is the story and what our relationship was and why we got together, and all of that is gone. So I was always interested in stories, and there just wasn't a good way to capture them. And so I always felt that this will only work if capturing a story was as simple as what's happening now, a conversation. Okay. Well, right now it's one way, but having a two-way conversation is a lot better. And so that's what Storied Life AI is. You literally choose a topic like my first childhood memory, and you start talking, and the AI actually understands you. So if I say, my first memory is sitting on the beach with my mom, and I'm playing, and suddenly a wave kind of takes me over, and she picks me up. Okay, that could be just a story. And the AI is smart enough to actually understand what you said and say, well, tell me what it felt like, at that moment. Well, I was shocked, but I was actually excited and felt safe in my mom's arms. Okay. Well, tell me more about what happened that day. So it's really a back and forth conversation, and which you could only do with AI now, that literally a year ago was not possible. What the AI does is not only sort of capture the conversation that goes back and forth, but actually summarizes it as a story. And so what happens is you're using Storied AI to really tell it's a set of conversations that are then turned into stories. You can add pictures to it and so on. Like, so if I talk about my day at the beach with my mom, I may add a picture of me with my mom. And it's smart enough to understand the connection between the photo and the conversation. And so the end result of this is that over time, you're talking to the app, having a conversation that is usually a very empathetic conversation, and that turns into a book at the end of the day. So you're getting a book out of this. I had the fortune to build a number of technology companies, and I think I mentioned to you that the reality is always less than what you expect. You're lucky if it's 90%. In this case, it's been more than 100%, and it really not because the technology is better than what I thought. It's that the impact on people is more than I thought. There's sort of a pattern that seems to be evolving where, in the first couple of minutes, people are kind of like, really? You want me to talk to the phone? Like, what? And then when they get over that, suddenly they realize, oh my God, this actually understands me, and really understands me maybe better than most people do, because most people, don't take the time. And then beyond that, after a while they forget that it's a phone, and they're really talking to themselves. But because it's questions that somebody else asked them, they're actually opening up more to themselves. They're connecting with themselves through this app because somebody else was interested and asked the question. And then when the conversation is summarized into a story in different words that they did not use themselves, but they hear their own life in a different way, a lot of times we see people break down in tears, just because they re-experience their own life in a different way than they're used to. That's what seems to be happening with people. Now, we're really just launching now, and We really want everybody here to have access to it, either for yourself or for your parents or other loved and close one, maybe people you work with. We're making it free right now because we're really trying to learn what do how do people like it. If there's ways that we need to improve it, we're happy. We want to do that. And you won't find it on the App Store, so you have to basically go to our website. You can get a card for me. Go to our website, just put your first name and email, and we'll send you an invitation. It's by invitation only, okay? So we'd love it if you join us. For us, it's a journey that we're on to really capture people's essence and make sure that it doesn't get lost. We all know that people just, as they get older, life kind of shrinks, people don't pay attention, and we're trying to capture that essence of people and share it in a compelling way with their loved ones, okay? Happy to answer any questions, just come over.
Ladies and gentlemen, really happy to introduce Jess from Hospice Toronto.
So around the same time, I had started volunteering with Hospice Toronto, which was founded in the 1980s, and it's a community-based organization that trains volunteers to go into people's homes and provide companionship and respite care. And if you haven't already, I would totally encourage you to chat with them about all the many programming services that they provide. So my first client, I want to tell you a little bit of a story about my client. So his name was Chance, coincidentally. Chance lived alone in a heavily subsidized one-bedroom apartment in Toronto. After years of drug and alcohol abuse, his body was ravaged, and so were his relationships with friends and family. And to put it quite plainly, he really had nothing and no one, except for the odd visit from a palliative care provider or a volunteer from Hospice Toronto. So over the course of several months, I would visit him at his home. And at first he was a little bit wary of me as a stranger, of course, but over time, and many, many hands of crazy eights, we broke the ice. He would tell me stories about his childhood growing up in the Tyendinaga Mohawk territory near Kingston, about his career as a professional lacrosse player, and then his later life as an artist and curator in Toronto. And I'll never forget one afternoon, after a particularly intense game of cards, he asked me to smudge with him. And of course, I was totally honored. I had never participated in anything like this before. And when we were done, he asked me to get this plain manila envelope from across the room. And it contained his collection of eagle feathers. One of the few kind of possessions that he had, actually, in his otherwise quite bare apartment. He pulled one out and he offered it to me as a memento, something, a keepsake for me to remember him by. Now, I couldn't accept it, which is a much bigger conversation around gift giving and receiving and the rules and boundaries that are placed on volunteers. But to say that I was touched by the gesture is a massive understatement. Going back to being a student, at this point I had come across the work of psychiatrist Dr. Harvey Max Chochinov at the University of Manitoba on dignity therapy, which many of you may have come across in the work that you do. So dignity therapy is a formalized intervention for people who are nearing the end of life, and the idea is that by talking about what matters to you, the life you've lived, how you wish to be remembered, that it can bring a sense of meaning and closure and help confront that existential distress that many of us feel near the end of life. The culmination of this is a legacy document, which many of you facilitate people producing. And of course, it's a kind of product that can be left behind for people to enjoy and cherish after you've gone. So there was something about this idea of legacy that really caught my attention. So as a researcher, I went to the literature and started digging around. What I had found is that other people had picked up on the idea of legacy, but it was clearly a nascent field of research, which of course made me very excited, because that's what we do. So emergent work that I found suggested strong interest from patients, families, and providers about legacy. And surveys, quantitative surveys, had found that people report benefiting emotionally and spiritually, which is sort of often academics sort of just state the obvious, right? That people with lived experience actually know. But there it was in black and white. But what I didn't see was any research on the complexities and diversities of people's experiences. Again, this is in the literature. So things like, what about non-Western perspectives on legacy, or what about the perspectives of people who, like Chance, were socioeconomically disadvantaged, or otherwise didn't appear to be interested in legacy. So I couldn't help but make that connection between legacy and my client Chance, and think, what would legacy mean for someone like him who had nothing and no one to leave something behind to, but also how do volunteers shape and are themselves shaped by participation in legacy activities. So with that in mind, I began my research with Hospice Toronto as my community partner. And over the course of a year, I spoke with 50 people, including their clients, volunteers, and staff, as well as death care professionals, people like palliative care doctors, nurses, and social workers, and also folks from the bereavement industry. So, as I begin to wrap this up, I promise, I wanted to share a few kind of lessons learned. And I'm still in the process of making sense of this, so stay tuned for the next expo. But a few lessons learned on legacy for people that practice this. So one is the absolutely invaluable role that volunteers can and do play in facilitating meaning making. Volunteers are unique because they're not your friend and they're not family, they're not a healthcare provider, and their whole purpose for being with you is to create that time and space to listen. And people telling stories, even if it's not formally described as such, is absolutely a kind of legacy making. Secondly, organizations that rely on volunteers must make every effort to leverage that unique role and expertise, because volunteers are often highly skilled people who come from the caring professions. So you otherwise run the risk of potentially alienating them if they don't feel truly valued as part of the care team. Thirdly, in terms of what legacy means for people, well, that's really the sort of bread and butter of my research and something I continue to unpack, but it turns out it means many things to different people. So there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. On one hand, legacy is far more than just the material stuff that we leave behind. It extends beyond into things like our relationships with people, our values, our morals, and the impact that we leave on each other and the planet. But at the same time, stuff absolutely matters. Our material possessions often serve as a kind of potent physical reminder of who we are and the life we've lived and how we wish to be remembered. So it's both relational and material. And then finally, participation in legacy activities can potentially be re-traumatizing. So this is where the kind of cultural sensitivity piece might come in. So all of us, no matter what type of life we've lived, have things about the past we maybe not like to revisit. But some of us, it could be more acute. So it's just important that as volunteers, providers, and bereavement professionals, we really allow our clients to lead the way and never push them to places they would rather not go. So by way of summary and returning to Chance, I just want to really emphasize that I, not just as a researcher, but as a volunteer and as a human, was left profoundly affected by our time together. He inspired me to think about legacy not just as a product to leave behind, but as a process, as something productive that's living and alive. He's someone I'm never going to forget, and in a very real sense, his legacy somewhat lives on in me and has become part of what I hope my legacy will be. And for that, of course, I'm forever grateful. So I just want to thank you very much for your attention, and also thank you for the work that you do. And I just can't tell you how cool it is to be in a room with so many like-minded individuals. It's like a nerd's Disneyland.